Good day, and thank you for tuning in 3D, the Daily Divine Direction broadcast. For all of our new listeners and viewers who are tuning in for the very first time, I'm Pastor Pope, and thank you for allowing us to come into your listening and viewing environment. We are here with you every Monday through Friday from 12:30 p.m. until 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, broadcasting live from the FijiWater.com sponsored studio, where you can discuss careers, finances, entrepreneurship. You can discuss marriage, divorce, raising children, blending families. You can discuss dating and relationships. But today, as always, the first Thursday of every month, scheduling permitted, we have with us Rebecca Buva, licensed and registered dietitian and nutritionist, BeccaTheDietitian.com. Hello, Becca. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you?
I am well. Thank you for asking. And I know all of our listeners and viewers were looking forward to having you with us. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you just fine. Hopefully you can hear me too.
Excellent. We can hear you, and we're delighted to have you with us. So, as always, today's Daily Divine Direction broadcast is brought to you by Fiji Water, Earth's finest water. And since you already know that Fiji Water comes from Fiji, we'll get right into the broadcast. But this is our sponsor for 3D, the Daily Divine Direction broadcast. So Becca has a topic for us, as she always does, and we are all excited to have you with us again, Becca, every month. And Becca, I just want, before we go live, before we get into the topic today, I just want to remind all of our listeners and viewers that we are going to be announcing the date, but we are going to be going to a 1-hour broadcast, but Becca will still be with us, scheduling permitted, every first Thursday. And we will start off, Becca will share the topic with me, and we'll start off the first from 12 p.m. until 12:30. We'll start talking about some of the topic that Becca's going to be discussing and answering all of your questions. And then the expert will be with us to continue from 12:30 p.m. until 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So Becca, please take it away, because our listeners and viewers have been looking forward to you being with us today.
All right. Well, thank you for having me as always. So this month we actually are going to have two topics because I just couldn't decide which one was better. So it just happens.
Well, actually, we did a little text exchange about that. And I have to confess, she's always on point with whatever she wants to discuss. I said, Becca, can you do both?
Well, both are great topics. So it definitely is good that we're covering them both. So it just so happens, every month it's National Month of so-and-so or week of this or that. There's multiple options for every month. And this month just so happens to be Osteoporosis Month, as well as National Barbecue Month. So both great topics, super important. So we decided let's cover them both. So I'm going to kick it off with osteoporosis before we get into barbecue season discussion. So osteoporosis, many of you have probably heard of this. It's been around for a long time. It's been talked about for a long time. It's also sometimes referred to as osteopenia in its earlier stages. So that might be a word that you may or may not have heard before. But both of them are a disease that consists of weakened bones and increased fracture risk. And something to know about is that it's a silent disease. So sometimes the first indication that you have developed osteopenia or osteoporosis is that you have a fracture or break a bone. So there's really few, if any, noticeable changes to your health to indicate that you could have it before that. It most commonly affects people over the age of 50, more often women than men, but both genders are at risk, and more so white women and Asian women than the other races. So those people are going to be at higher risk, but of course, anyone needs to make sure they're eating right, doing proper exercise to prevent it, especially starting out during those really important growth and development years in our youth. But if you were not active as a child, did not eat a lot of those important nutrients that we're going to go into in just a minute here that are important in your youth, at any point in your life, it can make a difference. So even if you are 55 years old and you never took into account these things before, you can still make positive changes that can reduce your risk of developing it or prevent it from getting worse. So there's always something that can be done to help with that. So really it comes down to nutrition and exercise. The nutrients that we want to really focus on are calcium, that's number one. And then of course, vitamin D, vitamin K, potassium, and magnesium also play a role, but calcium is probably the most important of all of those nutrients. So I'm really going to focus on that today. You may have noticed if you look at the nutrition facts labels that calcium is one of those nutrients listed there. And that's because most Americans don't get enough of it. So I really wanted to focus on that and talk about that. Our needs range from 700 to 1300 milligrams per day, depending on your age group. It is going to be the highest at 1300 a day for ages like 9 to 18. But then the second highest is going to be 1200 milligrams a day, and that's recommended for women over 50 or for men over the age of 71. So everybody else, 700, I think, is more so in the younger years when you don't require as many calories and as many nutrients, just because it's got a lot smaller of a body than an adult. And then 1,000 is probably that's the standard for most adults from age 19 to 50 if you're a woman, or 19 to 70 if you're a man. So main sources, I'm sure you're familiar with milk, yogurt, cheese, all your dairy products, calcium fortified soy milk or other milk alternatives like almond milk is going to have a good amount of calcium. But you want to be careful because some milk alternatives like coconut milk, for instance, might not have as much calcium as some of the other versions. So you definitely want to pay attention to that when you're looking, deciding between different milk alternatives to use. Soybeans are a great source, dark green leafy vegetables, tofu that's calcium fortified. Those are all going to be your highest food sources. If you don't eat many of these, or you just don't think there's a way you can increase more than what you're doing currently and you're not meeting your needs, you might want to consider a calcium supplement. I do want to just put it out there, even a regular multivitamin supplement is not going to meet 100% of your needs. So if you're only eating one serving of yogurt a day, taking a multivitamin, you're probably still falling short. So it's really important to pay attention to this. So any questions on calcium and osteoporosis?
So, it's interesting because I'm sure you probably noticed I was looking to see if anyone texted for a moment, or I didn't get to the emails yet, but someone made an interesting comment and said that they have a elderly parent who broke a hip. Is that caused by a lack of calcium, osteoporosis?
It could potentially be. Yeah, so as I mentioned, sometimes that is the first sign that you have an issue. And, think about it. If a younger person falls, a lot of times it doesn't result in a fracture, but when an older person falls, a lot of the times it does. And that probably is because their bones have weakened over time. And something, that's really, I find really interesting. The body is really good. And I've said this before on a lot of different topics, but the body's really good at maintaining homeostasis. So if at any point your blood levels of calcium drop, your bones are going to mobilize their calcium stores to keep your blood levels in homeostasis. So as a result of that, they're pulling calcium out of our bones and weakening them to keep our blood levels normal. So even if your calcium levels are always normal on your blood work, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're good in terms of your calcium intake and your calcium stores. A DEXA scan is how they can diagnose osteopenia and osteoporosis. So they would need to have that completed. There's not really any lab work that I'm aware of that you could take in order to figure that out.
Well, and she did indicate that, there's not a lot of communication about. So what can you do to, enhance? What can you, I was thinking, and let me just, if I may back up for one moment. When you were making the comment, sometimes we don't think about common sense things. You made a comment about coconut milk and the people using coconut milk as instead of, milk or soy milk or whatever the case may be. You'll notice the thickness, the dexterity of the difference between the two, the color difference between the two. So I can only look at that from a practical perspective and say there's got to be more in, vitamin milk with vitamin D, or even 2% milk as opposed to coconut. That's the first thing that went through my mind. So some of these things, Becca shares a lot of great information with all of us. Some of these things we have to think about what she's saying and actually, look at the practical side of it and say, okay, we can do better by using this information, because the information that you give us, Becca, it allows us to really enhance the quality of our lives daily. And if we just apply this, because we're going to get into some questions when we get into the food aspect and the barbecue and all of that, just the things that people are talking about with regard to weight loss and nutrition. And you mentioned vitamin D. So could you also tell our listeners and viewers the benefits of vitamin D? Because I know you and I have had this conversation briefly before. One of my things my primary physician has sworn to over decades is that vitamin D is really a great source of everything. Now, you obviously can get that from being outside. We're runners, so we get it when we're outside running. But there's also supplements that you can take that will be helpful also. But if you would share with all of our listeners and viewers and just remind them of all of the possibilities of getting vitamin D. And
yeah, absolutely. So the best source is always going to be sun exposure, but you have to remember, and I think we have talked about this before, if you're wearing sunscreen, you're blocking the UV rays, so your body is not going to be able to absorb as much vitamin D, or we don't absorb vitamin D, but your body's not going to be able to produce as much vitamin D if you're wearing sunscreen. If you're covered up with clothing, that's the same as true. If it's the winter time and the UV index is lower, that's of course a factor. So we really, sometimes we can't get everything that we need from the sun exposure. There are some foods that contain vitamin D, although it's pretty limited. A lot of fatty fish like salmon, they actually contain vitamin D as well, because they can produce vitamin D the same way that we can. Mushrooms, same thing. And a really great way to get more vitamin D out of your mushrooms, if you eat those, is to actually just sit them on the windowsill and let them absorb some sunlight for maybe 15 minutes or a little bit longer before you use them in your cooking, and then you'll get a little bit of extra vitamin D that way. And then of course you can always go the supplement route. If those are not foods you consume, if you're not drinking vitamin D fortified milk or vitamin D fortified orange juice, you can always go for a supplement as well. And a lot of times that's really needed in the winter months, because vitamin D, not only for our bones, for our brain health, for our immune system, it plays a role in so many different aspects of our health. And
you can do both. Becca's telling us you get it natural, get out in the sun and produce the vitamin D, but in addition to that, you can take supplements also. But I have to tell you, I have an allergy to mushrooms.
Oh no.
I do, and I do like the idea of getting as much, for example, salmon. That's a great source. So
yeah,
we really have to. The omega-3 is great for our bodies also. But Becca, this is really important for us, and I really want to have you delve into some more components of that, and of course the food. Before we do that, I just want to remind everyone this segment of our broadcast has been brought to you by T-Mobile, America's largest, fastest, most reliable 5G provider at no extra charge. So if you're not currently a T-Mobile customer, call or text T-Mobile call or text line at 267-992-1424. We will move you into our queue so that you may become a T-Mobile customer and experience America's largest, fastest, and most reliable 5G provider at no extra charge. Taxes and fees are included in your bill, and if you auto pay by attaching a credit card to your account, you will receive a discount on your monthly bill. At T-Mobile, America's largest, fastest, and most reliable 5G provider at no extra charge. So, Becca, tell us what else we can do to improve our bone health, because you mentioned something. There's a big gap between women and men. Mm-hmm. And I know as a man, I've been a man all my life. So, I want to stay as healthy as I possibly can. I had a whole conversation with someone this morning about running. The older we get, we begin to lose some of our bone density. Did I get that correct?
Yep,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
So please share with us how we can, for
Yes,
all of
I'm
the
so glad
younger
you brought that
generations
up.
also.
You're
So,
keeping me on track here. So the second component aside from diet is going to be exercise, weight bearing exercise, and impact exercise. So running is a great example. Every time your heels hit the ground, it sends shock waves up your calves, up your thighs, your whole body. And that impact helps actually strengthen our bones. So things like running, jumping, of course, within reason, you know, we don't want to do anything that's contraindicated or that your doctor would not recommend if you have injuries or something like that. But getting a little bit of impact can actually really be helpful for strengthening bones. And then the weight bearing exercise as well. So building up your muscle mass, lean body mass is going to be really protective of your bone health too. Now you have to kind of assess like, where am I at right now? We don't want you going from being a couch to potato to CrossFit overnight.
exactly. Exactly.
But you know, ease yourself into it. Talk to your doctor if you have concerns, or maybe find a personal trainer if that's within your means, or find YouTube videos of beginner exercises you can do. There's so many different resources out there, depending on where you're at, you know, what equipment you have. You know, there's lots of different options. So that's a really important part of it.
Well, I got to interrupt because I want everyone to see what you just did. You said, if you have the means, you can hire a personal trainer or you can do this. And that's what our listeners and viewers love about you also, is because you break it down, make it simple. But we have to realize that there's so many ways. You use YouTube as an example. There are so many ways that we can find exercises that we can do to improve our health and wellness. And Becca just destroyed a myth. And I don't know if you realize that you did that when you said, even your heels hitting the ground send shock waves that then will strengthen your bones, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, we hear all of these things, you know, don't run because eventually it's going to damage your bones, your knees, and all of those things. But Becca just shared with us, there are things we can do to improve our health and wellness, and that will destroy some of these myths, because, you know, society's taught us a lot of things that are not reality.
Yeah. Well, hey, if you dive deep in anything, everything will kill you. So
Yes, exactly. And and you know, personally, I always make it personal when I'm listening to you talk to our listeners and viewers, and I'm thinking about the way I run, heel toe, you know, and so it's, you know, I know now that that's actually going to strengthen my knees that have been operated on 4 times. And so it's really amazing for all of our listeners and viewers to hear you every month. It just does so much to enhance our health and wellness. And I know we love you, but I know that's why they love you also. So I'm gonna stop interrupting and let you continue, because this
all
is
right.
good stuff.
Well, I appreciate the love.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, well then, you know, if there's any other questions about osteoporosis, calcium, exercise, anything like that, we can always answer it during the Q&A. But I will move on to make sure we have enough time to cover National Barbecue Month. I
Nice.
love that the month of May is barbecue month because we're finally getting into the warmer weather, even though it's been pretty mild, but hopefully consistently now it's going to be warmer, sunnier, less rain, less wind, all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. So it's barbecue season.
Yes.
So, you know, I want to just mention a few food safety aspects to keep in mind, so we can reduce our risk of getting sick and having to waste time indoors whenever the weather's so nice outside.
Absolutely.
So just a few quick tips here. So one is, you know, make sure you have a food thermometer, so that you can ensure all of your proteins are cooked through to the appropriate internal temperatures. That's going to make a huge difference in reducing your foodborne illness risk. A lot of these harmful bacteria and pathogens are killed at a certain temperature, and it's different for every type of meat. So it's different for ground beef, it's different for steak, it's different for fish, for pork, chicken, even like casserole dishes are all a little bit different. And it tends to range from 145 to 165, higher, you know, towards that 165 for foods that, you know, are most commonly containing those foodborne illnesses, like your ground meats, chicken should be cooked to 165. And then it can be a little bit lower for ones that less commonly contain those foodborne illnesses. And I can find a chart that goes over all those, so it can be posted to the Facebook page.
Nice.
Because I don't want to mess anything up and tell
No,
anybody
no,
the
you're
wrong
fine.
thing. I don't know those off the top of my head so well. But that's number one. So make sure you're cooking your foods to the right temperature with a thermometer. The next is making sure that you're cleaning your grill between uses. So, you know, I myself, I'm not the best at this, but whenever I think back to my childhood and my dad grilling, I always remember him starting off with the scrubber thing
Yes.
to get all the char off. So you want to do that. You can actually use hot soapy water to kind of wash off the grill as well. So that will be helpful from, you know, food safety perspective, but also helping to reduce intake of like the char, which is carcinogenic. It can, you know, increase your risk of cancer and other issues and stuff. So definitely want to watch out for that. When prepping foods, we want to remember to use separate cutting boards, knives, utensils, whenever preparing raw meats. And then you're ready to eat food. So we would never want to use the same cutting board or knife for, you know, some raw chicken and then go ahead and use it on our vegetables. That's a big no-no. Definitely a risk of cross-contamination there. So try and use separate, or at least wash the different utensils between uses of different foods. When marinating different animal proteins or meats or whatever, you know, your main protein is going to be, we want to try and marinate in the refrigerator rather than on the counter. And then if there's any excess, either throw it out, or if you do intend to use the excess marinade, make sure you boil it, so that you can kill any bacteria that could be in there from the raw proteins as well. And then after the food is done, we want to make sure we refrigerate everything promptly. So, you know, a day like today, maybe even a day into the 70s, the rule is 2 hours. So food can be out at room temperature for 2 hours. After that, we want to stick it in the fridge because the risk of bacteria growing at that point becomes much higher. On a really hot day, like 90 degrees or higher, that time drops to 1 hour. So it's a really actually short period of time that food should be sitting out. But the same goes for your condiments too. You don't want to forget about those. Mayo, mustard, ketchup, salsas, quesos, whatever it may be. The same rules apply for those as well. And then when it comes to leftovers, really the maximum amount of time we want to keep grilled leftovers in the fridge is 3 to 4 days. This is the point when not only the food safety becomes an issue, but the nutritional quality, the taste, you know, just the general quality of the food as well, like the texture, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be compromised at that point. So probably a good idea to throw it out after 3 to 4 days, unless you're feeling lucky.
No, that really makes sense. And this is I'm sitting here and I'm just in awe because, you know, it makes sense when you think about these things, but so often we don't think about it. But, you know, we all might like some leftovers the next day because, you know, after the you know, the seasoning and the juices have all, you know, set overnight.
They sit.
That's great. But like you said, you know, you start getting into the 3 to 4 range, you're a little
slimy at that point.
Exactly. But we have to be intentional about all these things, and that's why Becca's sharing all this information. So Becca, I'm going to put you on the spot, and
all right,
can you make some recommendations for food that would be good for like Memorial Day that's coming up later this month and throughout the month? I don't know when everyone else starts grilling, but
hey, that's as good a time as any.
Yes.
So your lean proteins are going to be great options. So, you know, maybe burgers made with a leaner ground beef, or turkey burgers, chicken burgers, something like that. Or even they make like fish burgers now. Those are great.
Yes. Salmon burgers they make.
Yeah. Salmon burgers are good. I've seen mahi burgers. They're really good too. You know, different cuts of beef that are leaner. If you can see a lot of visible fat, it's probably not a lean cut. For beef and pork, if you see the word loin in it, like sirloin or tenderloin, that tends to mean it's leaner. So you can equate loin with lean. That's a good rule of thumb.
That's an excellent rule.
Yeah. So for chicken, it's going to be the lighter meat versus the darker meat. So chicken breasts rather than like drumsticks or thighs. I personally prefer the chicken thigh. I know a lot of people probably feel that way as well. But you know, to kind of make chicken breast a little bit more appealing, try a marinade. That'll definitely add some
Nice.
juiciness to it,
Yes.
that maybe you wouldn't have without. Seafood, different types of fish are great on the grill, like those different fish burgers, or even just, you know, a whole fish fillet. If you like to eat fish like that as well. And then of course, there's different plant-based proteins out there that can be grilled, but definitely check the nutrition facts because a lot of these are processed. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be lean.
There's that word,
So
processed
definitely keep
food.
that in mind.
And
Yep.
you've told all of our listeners and listeners and viewers, and including myself, you've told us about, reminded us about processed foods,
Yes.
not the best for our health and wellness.
Every once in a while, it's definitely okay, but we just don't want to do it on a regular basis. That's all. But you know, hey, a special occasion like the 4th of July, for instance, it might be okay to have a hot dog on the 4th of July. I think that's going to be all right. But then some of my other favorites for grilling would be a lot of different vegetables. So zucchini, squash, eggplant, corn. I like grilled asparagus, peppers, tomatoes, and you can even grill fruit too, like grilled pineapple, grilled watermelon. And those can be either a healthy side or maybe a little healthier dessert. So something sweet, but it's a plant-based whole food without
pineapple.
any added sugar.
I love pineapple, and it has natural sugar, so that's a good thing.
Yep, exactly.
So now Becca has given us our full menu for the summer. So we need to focus on this. And I just want to, Becca, remind everyone that in addition to, you know, we start eating a lot more during the summer, we've got to get some exercise.
Oh yeah.
Right. We've got to, and so Becca pointed out, you can go on YouTube and find some good floor exercises you can do, or some exercises you can do. We encourage everyone, walk or run. Body in motion stays in motion, right? And Becca, do you have, I'm putting you on the spot once again, do you have a fitness routine that you're going to follow during the summer?
So I'm going to do a balance of, you know, running outside just because I do love running in the summer months, balanced with a lot of different strength training exercises. So yoga, Pilates, weightlifting. Pretty much the only difference between summer and winter for me is I go from the Peloton bike to the streets in the summer because I'm running outside.
Okay. And you're doing, you do pretty much do the same things every year during the seasons?
Yeah, I like to change it up. That way my body doesn't get totally used to cycling. Then it gets, you know, it's a surprise whenever I start to run a little bit more again.
Yes.
So yeah, it's good to change it up.
Okay, so let's make certain that in addition to eating and having a good time this summer and enjoying ourselves, that we get some exercise, we do some floor exercises. I'm going to, I think I'm going to take a page out of your book and actually try go back to trying some yoga this year.
All right,
summer.
I like it.
Yes, and I may even try a Pilates class this summer.
All right.
So do some different things. That's what we're encouraging you to do, is just do something different. You heard Becca mention she changes up a little bit so that her body doesn't get too used to doing any one thing. And as you've all heard me say this many, many times, Becca is a picture of health. So she's got this down to a science, and it's not just because she's a registered dietitian and nutritionist. This is a lifestyle. And what she's creating for all of us is a lifestyle. She's giving us information that, you know, every month, as she started off the broadcast, every month there's some particular month of. And if we just focus on those things that Becca shares with us, it will improve all of our health and wellness, so that as we get our annual physicals, we will find that we're in much better condition. We'll know our numbers, and our numbers will improve, and they'll be so much better. So Becca, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers about both topics before we go off the air today? Because this has just been so great. And we, of
Oh,
course,
I'm so glad. Well, I hope that everybody, enjoys the warmer weather that's to come, and hopefully you all have great plans for Memorial Day, which is, I think, just 3-4 weeks away.
Yes.
Yeah, so hopefully you got some new grilling ideas.
Well, we certainly have from you. We may not have had any of our own, but we now have them from you. So thank you so very, very much, Becca. Today's Daily Divine Direction broadcast 3D, as always, has been brought to you by Fiji Water. A taste of paradise will be delivered right to your front door when you subscribe for delivery, and you'll save money at FijiWater.com. May God bless you today. May God keep his face turned towards you. May God give you peace that surpasses all understanding. I want to say again, Becca, thank you so much for being with us. Would you say goodbye to our listeners and viewers, because they love you almost as much as we love you. We've just known you longer, but we thank you so much for